Welcome to the Samong Outdoors podcast, everybody. This is episode number 2 of the podcast. It is Tuesday, so it's time for a new episode. I'm Nate Cutshall.
I'm Samong Yang. We're both the co-hosts for this podcast, and we're excited to have you guys here. This is a podcast that is brought to you by a few companies. One of them right behind me. This is brought to you by Vortex Optics. Regardless of what optics you're trying to look into, binoculars, rifle scopes, spotting scopes, you name it, Vortex Optics has you covered regardless of your budget. Whether you have $100 to spend on a binocular or $2,000, Vortex Optics has you covered.
And if you like to golf, they got some of that stuff
That too.
Another sponsor of today's podcast is Onyx Hunt. They are a great mapping software that we've used for years now, and they've got public land boundaries, private land boundaries. They show you topography. You can look at satellite imagery, and they are just a great tool to use on your hunts.
You can use code SY20 to save on your subscription at Onyx Hunt. Also, brought to you by Tacticam. They are a trail cam company, and they are what Nate and I use exclusively now, where the world is going. Cellular trail cameras. You can just set your trail cam up, and you don't even need to go check your SD card. When something comes through, your phone dings, sends you the photos right to your phones.
Attach them to a solar panel, and you got power to your camera all year long as well.
You don't need to be wasting gas money, and your energy running back and forth to go check trail cams anymore.
Absolutely. So today's podcast is going to be getting into your first backcountry hunt or backcountry hunting for beginners. This is something that we feel like we can maybe provide some insight and value on. But before we get into the podcast, we are going to start off with Trivia Duel.
This
Samong?
is a game that we are doing. So Trivia Duel is a game where Nate and I, we both prepare a question each, and we have a question to ask the other person, and the other person has to guess it correctly. If not, then nothing happens as of right now. But in the future, there might be some consequences to whoever doesn't get it right. So, do you want to go first, or do I want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay. Trivia question. On the topic of backcountry, we're going to stick to that. Okay. This is not a multiple choice. Like many different industries, the backcountry enthusiasts have their own dialect to describe certain activities. What does the term camel up mean in respect to backcountry terminology?
Camel up.
Camel up, like the camel, the animal camel up.
Okay. I'm going to go with, because camels, when they hit a water source, they drink a lot of water, and it's known, I don't know how much water they store in their humps, but I've always heard they store water in their humps, along with the fact that Camelback is a long-time hiking brand. I'm going to say Camel Up is that when you hit a water source and you don't know when your next water source is going to be, that you take on as much water as you can in your bladders and bottles.
That is spot on.
Is it?
That is accurate.
Absolutely.
The term camel up, according to backcountry enthusiasts, means chugging water before leaving a water source.
Okay.
Nailed it.
I guess
Impressive.
I could have added chugging.
No, you nailed it.
Okay.
We'll give you that one.
All right. I did not stick to backcountry hunting.
You're good.
And this week you have a multiple choice question because last week was a
beautiful.
little bit brutal.
Beautiful.
All right. What is the average clutch size for wild turkeys? All right. Is it A, 6 to 8, B, 8 to 10, C, 10 to 12, or D, 12 to 14?
C, 10 to 12.
That's right.
I knew that one. I actually knew that one.
Did you know that one?
Yeah, I did know that one.
It's cool because this last spring we had a clutch of turkeys on our property, and the clutch size was 11. Right
in the average.
Right in the middle of the range.
Beautiful. Wow. We're a lot better at this stuff if we give ourselves credit.
Hey,
that is
we know something.
Trivia Duel right there. And we'll end the podcast later on a different game. But to get back on topic, this week we want to touch on the topic of backcountry, as Nate has previously mentioned. And this is actually a topic where I get a lot of questions from people. And I understand the hurdle before you fully commit to it, but at the same time, I feel like that hurdle some people tend to exaggerate it, and it's not as hard as people might take it to be.
Well, I think in today's hunting industry, the industry portion of it, the companies, the influencer side, has really, like, just like you're saying, it's made this big thing out of putting the word backcountry into something. This is a backcountry hunt. When in reality, all that probably means is that you're sleeping in a tent and a couple other things that we'll talk about. And to actually get into backcountry hunting, the mental hurdle that you have to come over, that we had to overcome, once you do it and you just get into it, you realize that it's a really reasonable thing to do. There's a wide range of what falls under the umbrella of backcountry hunting.
Without further ado, let's start with defining what backcountry hunting is. What is backcountry hunting? Backcountry hunting, in the simplest terms that I can put it, is simply hiking into a spot where it's relatively remote and you're living out of your backpack or things that you have packed. You are not by the truck and you are not in an area where people can drive to.
Yeah, I think the way I've always thought about it is backcountry hunting is once you get yourself into an area that's not reasonable to day hunt. Once
Yes.
it's just a little bit farther, then you can hit the truck in the morning, hike in, hunt, and hike out at night. So you just take that one next step farther.
Yes. So that, in the most simple form, that's backcountry hunting to us and to the vast majority of people, if I had to guess. Now, when it comes to backcountry hunting, it becomes more niche. There's different sections or types of backcountry hunt. And the most common that you and I do, we live out of our backpacks. We hike in with heavy packs, all of our food, all of our gear, everything is on our backs.
And this is probably what the majority of people are doing.
Because it is, one, the most cost effective, and two, it's the least amount of work compared to the other ones.
Yeah.
The other types where would be you utilizing something more old school, where people will drag in sleds, especially on late season winter hunts when there's snow on the ground. But more commonly that we have seen in the past decade is utilizing some type of animal, whether it's horses or mules or pack goats or llamas. You can also use those animals to pack in your gear into the backcountry, and then you can hunt wherever you set up base camp.
Yeah.
So those are typically the types of backcountry hunts. And again, it's just a different method to haul your gear in and your necessities into areas where you want to hunt, where it's remote. It's off-grid, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the two first basic points that we want to come across. And then the third one is, Nate, why should you backcountry hunt? Like, what is the premise of why somebody says, I want to go backcountry hunting?
Oh, I think, well, there's multiple reasons for sure, but there's definitely kind of this intrigue around getting into the backcountry, and I think that lies around a few things. I think the obvious things are you're getting away from people. Probably the farther you hike, the less people you're going to run into, and that opens up this door of potential for getting into animals that are less pressured, that hunters aren't seeing, maybe a higher quality animal, more mature, depending on what hunt you're doing. And I think that's the big reason of why people want to do it. There's a couple other portions of it too. I know for myself, there was this feeling of self-reliance, really having to feel like my gear and my fitness and these things are dialed in to kind of go push my limits. There's a mental hurdle, there's a physical hurdle, there's this self-reliance kind of got everything that you need for X amount of days, 6, 7, 8, 10 days in your backpack, and you're in there to deal with the weather, to deal with the conditions, kind of to deal with everything.
Oftentimes, not all the time, oftentimes when you're out there in the backcountry, you don't see people, you have the whole area to yourself, and there's this overwhelming sense of serenity in that you know you're just out here alone, and it frees your soul from thinking about what happens in our daily lives, your stresses, the things that come with living how we are so normalized now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what many people in today's world are chasing when they want to go backcountry hunting.
That's not, and yeah, absolutely. That's not something I expected to get into. I remember on our first backcountry hunt together in 2021, we did high buck, and a portion of it that really took me back was how beautiful the country was. I mean, you get into some beautiful country hunting no matter what, but once you backpack in, you discover parts of your state or other states that you didn't even know existed. Part of that too is a lot of times you don't have phone service, which is a big deal nowadays. You don't have your phone buzzing when you actually step away for multiple days, you know, maybe a week, and you have such little connection to technology. It's just like you were saying, it's really this feeling of serenity.
It's one of the last methods in today's world where you can truly disconnect your life from social media in the online world.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of why we backcountry hunt. And on top of that, oftentimes the hunting is a little bit better.
Yeah.
You have more animals in the backcountry. They're not as pressured, so they're not as skittish. They behave more like wild animals. But that's just something that's a given, right? Animals,
Yeah.
they're out there to survive. So obviously where there's a lot of people constantly going in and out, animals get smart. They know they're going to die, so they tend to start pushing their livelihoods back farther, deeper into the remote wilderness. And so on the topic of hunting, that's why.
Yeah.
Is there's less pressure, there's more animals, and when these animals are living in more remote areas where they're not seeing humans as much, the age class of those animals tend to go up because nobody's killing them when they're like 2 or 3 years old. And that's where you oftentimes find those giant, mature deer or elk or black bears even.
Yeah.
So that is why we want to go backcountry hunting.
Moving on a little bit, what are some things that you can do to get into your first backcountry hunt? Like, how can you break down that mental barrier? If you take a step back and you look at before you did your first backcountry hunt and you had that mental barrier of you had to have everything dialed, like how, looking back now, what are some things that you could have done to kind of make that transition or that first jump a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think to me, back in 2019 was the first year where I said, I want to start doing this that I see people doing on YouTube. Truthfully, that's the inspiration I got. And as someone who grew up not backcountry hunting, there was no prior knowledge other than what I saw online. And the biggest thing was because nobody was holding my hand, I said, I'm going to start small. A lot of people today think that when they say backcountry, it means you got to be at least 10 miles in the middle of nowhere in a wilderness. And it's true, but it's not the only way you can go about backcountry hunting, and it's not the only type of backcountry hunting. Today, you can turn almost anything into a backcountry hunt as long as you're living out of your pack or whatever it is, you're hiking a certain distance. You and I have backcountry hunted for turkeys.
So that's what I was about to say, is it also varies on what you're hunting and what the time of the year is and all these other things. You know, we backcountry hunt for turkey in an area that during deer season with shorter days, we have hiked through multiple times on day hunts. That would be considered quote unquote front country.
Yes.
But when you take that hunt and move it to the springtime, you know, in mid to late May for turkey hunting, when it's getting light and you want to start, you know, interacting with turkeys at 3:30 or 4 a.m., that all of a sudden becomes this kind of a hunt that's a little bit less realistic to get into unless you're, you know, starting at midnight or the evening before. And so a hunt like that, it's a fairly easy country to get into, you know, especially how we turkey hunt. You know, we're on forest roads and in forest land. We're not going up these crazy ridges and into, you know, high country or anything like that.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Nate said, backcountry hunts, you can turn almost anything into a backcountry hunt. Now, some people will argue that some of that's not true backcountry hunting, but that's not really the point I'm trying to get to. The point I'm trying to get to here is to get to the true, if you will, 10, 12 miles in a wilderness, it's smart, in my eyes, to start small.
Mm-hmm.
If you have no prior experience of backcountry hunting, you've never done it, you've never lived out of your backpack, you've never lived out of horses packing your gear, you probably want to start with little steps rather than just going from no experience straight into 12 miles into the Frank Church Wilderness. It's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So back to 2019 when I first started this, one of the first backcountry hunts I ever did was on a whitetail doe hunt. I drew a second deer tag here in Washington, and I told my cousin who was visiting me at the time, I'm like, if we backpack in here, we'll probably kill a doe. But I know it sounds crazy because who backpack hunts to go shoot a doe?
Exactly.
Right? But I told them, I was like, I just kind of want to test the waters and get a little bit better at backcountry hunting. So when we went in 2020, we had like Walmart tents, these like cheap old sleeping bags, like everything about it was just cheap. He didn't even have waterproof boots. So every night when we came back, because there was snow on the ground, he would take off his boots and his soles and try to dry it by the campfire. He would do that for like 2 hours before we called it in the tent. The next morning, we hiked like 100 yards, his feet soaking wet again because it's not waterproof, right?
Brutal.
But again, it's through those little experiences and even some people might say fake backcountry hunts where it's prepared me to do what you and I do today. And even today, we're still learning. Like I've only backcountry hunted for about 4 or 5, maybe 6 seasons, depending on how you count it.
Mm-hmm.
And because I started small around 2020, 2021, it's allowed me to be way more comfortable into doing what we're doing now because what we're doing nowadays, I would have never thought I would be doing back in 2020 when I first started getting into it. So that's kind of my point is you can turn anything into a backcountry hunt, but at the same time, there's merit to every single type of backcountry hunt you do because really the premise of it isn't the premise of doing those smaller backcountry style hunts is not, oh, I want to be in the true backcountry. It's like, no, it's simply preparing you how to filter water, dialing in your gear, having proper gear, teaching you what's important in the backcountry, teaching you how to survive out of your backpack. Some of those hunts back then, I only hiked in 2 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 miles is far enough that you can't just go back to your truck and like grab stuff if you need it or if you forgot it. You still had to be pretty self-reliant out there in your pack, and then you can slowly go farther in. Go 3 miles next time. Go 4 miles next time. Go 8 next time, you know?
Absolutely. And another way, when you are ready to start pushing in deeper and say you're by yourself, I talk to a lot of people. I'm sure you talk to a lot of people that reach out and they say, hey, I want to do these hunts, but I don't have a hunting buddy. I don't have a hunting partner. And I'm a little bit nervous to do it solo. What if I actually shoot a deer or a bear or an elk and I'm way far in? What do I do? And that can be a barrier to them as well. And one thing that you can do is, you can go on a shed hunt in the spring. You can go on summer scouting trips in the summer or early fall. Or if you just need to get past that first barrier of breaking into deeper backcountry, you can do it with a little bit less of the risk or consequence, you could say, of getting stuck back there with a big animal. And then once you build up that confidence of, I was able to get in and get out pretty well. I think I could, either do this out in one trip, or if I got an animal down, I could take a couple trips. And it's just able to build your level of comfort and your ability and your kind of mental strength to get into the backcountry, especially solo, to actually get towards the hunt.
Yes, it builds resilience. In 2020, again, that's when I shot my doe. The next year, you and I did what we would consider a true backcountry, high country mule deer hunt. And I remember in 2021 on that hunt, I was like, I am never doing this again. I was like, I am not ready for this. I don't think I can do this. Right?
And this is something you've talked about every single year since.
Yeah, this was to date, and we're speaking in relative terms here, right? Like that hunt at that time with where I was mentally, where I was physically, it was the most difficult hunt I have ever done. There are hunts today that I do that's way more physically exhausting, but because of where I am mentally now, it just didn't come off as challenging, respectively, right? It's just like once you come past that hurdle, now you feel like I could tackle pretty much any hunt I want to do. Now, granted, there's limitations to it. There's a fine line between being confident and being overconfident, right? Like you have to really know what you're capable of and what you're willing to do, because as much as we portray backcountry hunting as this amazing trip, it can be very dangerous if you do it wrong or something goes wrong.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why we want to talk about this is that some of these things that we're sharing are ways to kind of break down some of the big barriers that just bar none prevent people from backcountry hunting. Doing ones closer in by yourself, or doing, something that's not a big animal. Some of these things that we've talked about, but that is not to say that it makes backcountry hunting quote unquote easier. It's not an easy hunt, and especially the mental side of it, kind of like we were sharing last week with our SOS Basin story, little things that you don't think about, like the time out there that goes so slow on a fall day when you have 12, 13, 14 hours of daylight, and you're not used to that. You're not used to slowing down like that. And it takes a huge mental toll until you kind of get to it. And then like 2021, you were not mentally there for that hunt, but also like we both discovered where our physical side was lacking. And it was not easy in any means.
We ended up killing a deer, so I'm pretty proud of that. But still, at the same time, like that hunt pushed your limits, and to this day, it sucked in the moment. But like to this day, I'm very thankful I did that hunt, because as much as I've done backpacking hunts up to that hunt, like I wish I would have done more of it to better prepare. But like you never know, right? It's like sometimes you take a bigger leap, and you might have underestimated the hunt, but then once you get through it, it's like, there you go. I just learned way quicker than doing three or four other smaller hunts in between.
Yeah.
With that said, that's the premise of backcountry hunting. Next, we want to jump into some of the gear that goes into backcountry hunting that you and I have found beneficial to our success in the backcountry, and things that people might think they need, but they really don't need. So we have some categories here, and we'll kind of jump back and forth between what we use personally between Nate and I.
I think there's a couple things that fall under the absolute necessity for backcountry hunting. This is coming from a 21st century hunter. This is a lot different than the 1970s, 1980s when people went in and flannels and jeans on a horse to a canvas tent 40 miles deep in Wyoming. Maybe we're a little bit softer nowadays. Maybe we're a little bit safer. But I think a couple things, and then we can elaborate on these, is a good pack, good boots, and first aid / a plan to get out / survival gear.
Yes.
Whether that's communication devices, first aid kits, communicating like we talked about last week with family, friends, hunting partners.
And I'll add on a little bit. Clothes. You obviously need clothes to survive. When it comes to these things, every market is saturated with options today. And where the gimmick comes, in this case, I'll just narrow it down to clothing. You need clothes to survive. You need warm clothes to stay warm. The gimmick is nowadays there are some companies trying to sell you a quote-unquote premium product at a premium price. But the real question is, do you actually need that? Can you get away with cheaper end stuff, right? So the first thing that we're going to touch on is boots, because frankly, you need boots, good boots, to have a good time out there. So for the past 5-6 years, I really haven't dabbled into too many boots, but I've always landed on crispy boots, and in the past 3 years, Schnee's boots. And those are still what you and I both currently use.
Yeah, and boots were one of the things when I was just getting into this hunting, it was the last thing that I wanted to spend my money on.
Yeah, who wants to spend $500 on a pair of boots?
Exactly. I thought it was I was like, man, I want to spend money on a lighter backpack or a nicer tent that's easier to set up, all these things. I did pay the price for it. In 2021, the pair of boots that I took into the backcountry was $65 or $70 pair of boots from North 40, and my feet got destroyed.
They ate your foot.
Yes, it was not a pretty sight. And I came home and I reevaluated where I was at with footwear, and I understood the importance of good footwear, and I bit the bullet on a pair of Schnee's boots, and I've worn Schnee's ever since. Schnee's were my first good pair of boots, the Beartooth 200-gram insulation boots. I've worn them since, and I've never regretted.
If you've never backcountry hunted, you can either learn from us or you can learn the hard way and go and hunt out of cheap boots out there. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot. I come from a background where I used cheap Goodwill clothes and shoes and you name it. Did it work? Yes. Was it the best? Was I super comfortable all the time? Absolutely not. So there's a fine line that you have to distinguish. Do I want to be comfortable out there, or do I just want to be able to do the hunt, even if that means I'm sacrificing some comfort? So when it comes to boots, I guess in more broad terms, footwear, that's what I would say spend your money on. Good socks, like what I'm wearing right now, darn tough socks. They're merino wool. They're good at fighting odor, and on top of that, they're very comfortable because they have cushion. So every time you take a step, you're not just stepping on just a hard sole of your boot. There's actually a little bit of cushion. It might not sound like it's much, but when you're doing miles upon miles for like a week, 10 days, every little bit of cushion goes a long ways.
It's kind of, and like we'll talk about with packs, it's along the same line, is it'll sneak up on you, and you'll realize, like I did in the 2021 hunt, by day 5, 6, I would wake up in the morning and I wouldn't want to put my boots on and get out of my tent, which created a hard barrier between me and success, or at the time between Steve or you filling a tag. Having a pair of boots that allows your foot to build up some resilience, allows you to have some more comfort, is really important with that aspect.
Yeah. So to wrap it up on boots, the purpose of having good footwear is, one, they don't hurt. You minimize joint pain, you minimize the chances of you getting blisters, and on top of that, if you have a good boot, a taller boot, you also minimize the risk of rolling your ankle sprain, because if you roll your ankle 7 miles back in the backcountry, you're going to have a fun time hiking out of there, especially when your pack's like 50, 60, 70 pounds heavy. Even more if you have an animal on the ground.
Yeah, and I mean that poses a legitimate threat to staying safe and being smart and all that part of it.
And then on top of that, one last thing to add is waterproofness. The fact that you don't have to worry about wet socks every night or every time you step in snow or step over a little puddle, it goes a long way. It gives you a peace of mind that you don't have to worry about wet feet, because if your feet get wet on day 1, by day 7, fungi, all that nasty stuff, it starts to become a real possibility, and that goes down. There's no such thing as good from fungi. It's all downhill from there.
Yeah, and one thing is, like with hunting, especially day hunting with the truck, these are a lot of things that you don't experience a lot of times because you get this ability to reset day to day. You can come home, throw your boots on the dryer. Little things that you don't necessarily think about. You can plug in your phones. You can throw some clothes in the dryer. You can grab a new shirt. So these are kind of those things that you start to discover or realize the necessity of that really only come to fruition maybe 4 or 5 or 6 days in on a hunt.
Yes. Second, packs.
Yeah.
Your backpack right behind your footwear is key. And again, this isn't, you can argue this, but with how Nate and I hunt, we don't hunt from horses. We don't have pack animals. So it's really, we're self-reliant on us to pack in everything we need. So a good backpack is something that's a necessity for us. If you're backcountry hunting with horses, you can just use honestly whatever to carry your day gear, and then once you kill something on the ground, you can just go grab your horses, have them pack it out. Not a big deal. But with what we do and how we hunt, we need a good pack to not only carry 50, 60 pounds of our gear, but on top of that, when we kill something, whether it's a bear or a deer, you're throwing all that extra meat, all that extra weight on top of your gear, and it has to be able to withhold all of that, as well as be comfortable when you're hiking all of it out.
As comfortable as possible.
Yes. There's no really a comfortable 130-pound pack.
Correct.
But there are more comfortable packs than others.
And I mean, I guess I just like to learn the hard way, because I also did not in 2021 before the high country, and this wasn't even a backcountry hunt, but this is just a little personal experience sharing. I used to do a ton of backpacking, and so the backpack I had was an Osprey backpacking backpack, and we were not backcountry hunting, we were day hunting when I shot my bear in August of 2021. But that was the experience that opened up my eyes again to the necessity of a good backpack. When I loaded in, a backpack that's meant to have max maybe 45 or 50 pounds, when I made that a 90 or 100-pound pack, it was teetering on the edge of unmanageable.
Yes. So what are we saying? What are we looking for when it comes to a pack? So in today's market, I segregate the market into many different categories. We have hunting, day hunting packs, backcountry hunting packs, and then you have your hiking, casual, military type stuff. We are talking about true backcountry hunting backpacks. And in the market, there's not that many options. Maybe a handful at most. The one brand of pack that Nate and I we have come to love and use all of 2024, continuing into 2025, is the Initial Ascent backpacks. In fact, at the time of this recording, we just got a brand new bag. So Nate and I have been using the bigger bags, but we just got the smaller 3K bag from Initial Ascent for our shorter day hunts and whatnot. But when it comes to the backcountry hunting packs, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a pack where the foundation is a frame, a really good, solid, rugged frame where it doesn't crumble under heavy weight. And it just, when it sits on your back, it just feels almost like cardboard or not cardboard, like a plank of wood where it doesn't fold. There's no random spots of it caving in on you when there's heavy weight attached to it.
A lot of times that comes through an external frame. Like
Yes.
there's frame packs, and then there's also internal frame packs. So a lot of the backpacking backpacks in today's industries are internal frame packs, and that means that the frame of the backpack is inside the back wall fabric of the pack. And like Osprey packs or Gregory packs, these popular backpacking brands, they're extremely comfortable because the frames are made of semi-rigid carbon a lot of times, and so they have great flex and fit to your body. The thing is, if you load up that pack then with maybe more than 45 or 50 pounds, what happens is the integrity of those semi-flexible carbon rods goes down.
Yes.
And they start to bend, they start to twist, and they start to pull the weight off of your body or across your body in ways that you don't want. Whereas a pack like the Initial Ascent or other packs in the hunting industry are external rigid frame packs. The Initial Ascent's frame is also carbon, but it's much closer to a sheet of carbon.
It's like a board.
It's like a board, and it is extremely rigid to where you sacrifice a little bit of comfort when compared to backpacking backpacks in that light range, in that 30, 40 pound range. But if you compare them once you load up an animal or heavy weight, it is night and day difference.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, these are by design. A backpacking pack is designed to carry at max 45 pounds. We kind of push the limits when we're putting 90 pounds of meat in that hiking backpack. These hunting packs, they are designed to shine at its best when you have like 100, 150 pounds in the pack, right? And so there's a balance of, okay, you can sacrifice a little bit of comfort when the pack's under 50 pounds, but it's really good when it's above 50 pounds.
Yeah.
There are some packs where it's the opposite, right? They're designed to be really good under 50 pounds, up to 50 pounds. Not so good when you go above 50 pounds.
Yeah.
So the frame itself is the foundation, and that's what we're looking for. If the pack does not have a good frame, it does not go backcountry hunting with us because we know that it's going to not do the job when we need it to do the job of packing out heavy weight. On top of that, the bag itself, so no longer the frame, so there's two sections. There's a frame and there's a bag. The bag itself needs to be big enough that it can hold all of our gear. So when you're out there for like a week, it's got to hold your tent, your cooking stuff, your jet boil or MSR, whatever it is, your food, right? Dehydrated meals, your bars, your jerky, you name it, waters, whether you're carrying a water bladder or an Nalgene, you name it. For us, camera gear, We carry a lot of camera gear.
Carry a lot of camera
multiple cameras at that as well. Spotting scopes. All of these things that go into your pack, your bag has to fit it.
Mm-hmm.
So with what Nate and I do, for the most part, we tend to lean between a 6,000 to about an 8,000 cubic inch pack.
Yep.
That in it of itself, for the most part, it covers what we like to do, because the general rule of thumb when it comes to choosing one pack to do it all, the bigger the better.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, because never once have I been out in the backcountry and I wished I had a smaller pack.
Yeah.
It's always been, I wish I had more room, right? So last year in 2024, I used the Initial Ascent 5K bag. You used the 8K. We essentially did the same hunts. I survived out of my 5K, but sometimes when I looked at you, I'm like, he's not having to fight for every square inch of space in his pack because they're so roomy.
Absolutely.
Whereas for me, because I had a smaller bag, there are some places where like I really had to like push my gear in to get it to sit right in the bag.
One upside, I will say, I'm totally with you there. There's a reason I have the 8K bag. There's a reason I use that on pretty much every hunt. One upside to a smaller bag, if you are newer to hunting, and I'm not saying that this outweighs having a bigger bag, is until you know what gear you need, if you have a bag that can fit everything,
yes,
you can get under the impression that you need to take everything. And that can be a little bit of a dangerous hole to get into. Excuse me. That can be a little bit of a dangerous hole to get into, because if I have an 8K bag, which the Initial Ascent 8,000 cubic inch bag, which is actually almost 9,000 cubic inches, I can, and I'm going on a 4 or 5 day hunt, I can fit 3, 4, 5 pounds of food a day if I wanted. I can fit, 2 extra puffies and all this stuff. And so if you're just getting into backcountry hunting and you don't know what gear is critical and what is not, don't use a bigger bag as an excuse necessarily to take every option of everything.
Yes, which is why we're having this conversation. The bigger is better in some aspects, but for more novice levels, more beginners, a big bag can kind of bite you because you're just throwing, oh, I might need this, I might need that, and the next thing you know, you're hiking in with an 80-pound pack, and then you kill an animal, you're like, I can't hike out 160 pounds in my pack, I messed up, right? So there's a balance there, and thank you for bringing up that point, because that's a very valid point. That was something I struggled with when I first started. I didn't know what I needed, so I just kept throwing random stuff in my pack.
Yeah.
So having a smaller bag limits you with what you want and what you actually need. That's the main point Nate was getting at there. But as a general rule of thumb, if you can only own one bag, get the bigger bag, because you can always cinch your pack, your bigger bag down if you don't need the extra room. So Initial Ascent does a really good job at that, because you use an 8K, and I don't really think for the majority of 2024 you needed all that room. But then when you cinched it down, our packs looked identical, even though mine was like 3,000 cubic inches smaller. That's what we're looking for. A good frame, a bag that's big enough to hold your gear, and on top of that, it needs to have the right features. Have the good zippers. It allows you to get into the main bag. It allows you to get easy access to the things that are like you really need. But then at the same time, it doesn't have so many features where you get lost of like where you might have put your tags or these smaller items, right? It's everything you need, nothing you don't need. That's basically
the goal.
That's what you want, right? And with today's market for the backcountry hunting packs, EXO Mountain Gear, Kafaru, Stone Glacier, Initial Ascent, they all are the top for the reasons that we have just talked about. They give you everything you need to do a successful backcountry hunt without sacrificing comfort for the most part, without sacrificing the things that you really need on a hunt. So when it comes to these top end packs, like really, you can just go with them. Those 4 are my recommendations, right? If you're looking for a top of the top hunting pack, Stone Glacier, EXO Mountain Gear, Initial Ascent, Kafaru, those are the 4 I would look at. We've landed on Initial Ascent as our go-to pack after using all of the other packs. So I have nothing but good things to say about all these top pack companies, but Initial Ascent is the standout for how I want to hunt and how I want to go about things.
And with the packs, just as a side note, if you guys are interested in a way more in-depth pack review, you can go over to Samong Outdoors on YouTube, which is Samong's YouTube channel that many of you are familiar with. And if you filter back, there's actually a 2-part. Is it?
It's a 2-hour video.
Yeah, or a 2-hour
gear review.
pack review back in 2022, I think, when you
yeah.
used all these 4 different packs and you go through these in much more depth.
Yeah, those might be a little bit outdated now because when I did that in 2021, like those are like older generation model packs. But the point is, I've used them all, and I'm not super up to date. But like the thing about a lot of these companies is even when they come out with a new pack, there's still a giant foundation as to where the pack is coming from. A lot of these newer packs, compared to like their older or previous models, they're essentially the same pack just with little tweaks, right? And so again, we are so lucky to have the options that we have in the backcountry hunting market today, because 10 years ago, you're stuck with that Osprey. You're stuck with that Gregory. You're stuck with these day packs that you just have to make it work.
Yeah.
So having options is always a good thing. The consumer wins, right? When businesses compete, the consumer wins, and we should all be thankful for that.
Absolutely.
So with Initial Ascent, you can use code SAMONG at checkout and save you some cash. So Initial Ascent, they're a pack company based out of Boise, Idaho, and they just really want to support what we do. And so they're giving you guys a discount code so that if you want to buy Initial Ascent pack, you can use code SAMONG at checkout and save you some cash.
So we looked at boots, we looked at packs. The packs are more hunting specific. The boots are more just backcountry in general specific. But both of those are kind of things that allow you to safely, effectively, more comfortably get into the backcountry, whether or not you're hunting. Those are scouting or anything, or even just backpacking. Let's look at the hunting aspect. So we'll skip over rifle because a good rifle, an accurate rifle, is something you need regardless of if you're backcountry hunting or not. But let's talk about optics, because I do think that that can be a difference in your backcountry hunting versus maybe your day hunting.
With optics, you really have to use the right optics for your hunt. Every hunt is different for the most part, and there are better choices of optics for certain hunts. With how you and I hunt, for example, let's just touch on the world of high country mule deer hunting. We are often sitting on one mountainside, glassing a mile, sometimes even 2 miles onto another giant mountain face, trying to peck out a very small deer in thick brush, cover, sometimes burns. So when you're glassing that far away, you need to have the proper optics to be able to pick up an animal at that distance and in that habitat. So Nate and I use exclusively Vortex because when you first started, you were rocking a $150 Vortex Crossfire binocular. I remember that.
Yep.
I was rocking a $2,000 Vortex Razor UHD binocular. The biggest difference between a low-end binocular and a high-end binocular is the optical clarity. You simply get a sharper image. You get better low-light performance, meaning you get more brightness in your image when you're looking through the binocular. And on top of that, the features, the ergonomics of the binocular tend to be a little bit better. The focus wheel tends to be better. The fit and feel of the binocular when you're holding it tends to be better. And it might not seem like it's that big of a deal, but when you're glassing 10 hours a day, that can mean the difference between getting fatigued, especially eye fatigued if your glass isn't top tier or upper on the scale, and then you just sleeping because your eyes hurt.
Yeah. And I think, one of Remy Warren's taglines has been for years, buy the best optics that you can afford. And I just think that's a great way to summarize it, because if we look at 2021, you were still, Vortex was one of your partners at the time, so you had great Vortex gear. I was just getting into this, and the best optics that I could afford were Vortex Crossfire, which is their low-end, consumer-friendly optics.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe you picked out more deer than me on the hunt, but we came out of that hunt. I also had a Crossfire scope on my Savage Access, maybe a Diamondback. And that's, their second tier optic. But those are the optics that allowed me to get into the backcountry to hunt. It allowed me to be successful on multiple hunts, but it wasn't a $2,000 binocular.
Yes, and that's a good point. So, as Remy Warren said, get the best optics you can, but as long as you have an optic that can help you, you can probably do it. Back then, in the 60s, 70s, people were getting it done with things not even close to the quality of a Crossfire from Vortex.
Mhm.
Today, we look at a Vortex Crossfire as like a really low end, because that's essentially what it is. But a Crossfire 40 years ago, now you're that guy, right? To add on to what Nate is talking about here. So I had a Razor UHD binocular, a 10x50. You had a 10x42 binocular. And we were glassing 2 miles out. And what spotted the deer? Neither one of them. The spotting scope did.
Mhm.
Having the right optic yields a higher percentage of finding deer. I don't care if my spotting scope was a low end spotting scope and my binocular was top of the line.
Mhm.
The reason why I spotted that herd of deer, that bachelor group that we ended up shooting, was simply because of the zoom.
Mhm.
Being able to look 2 miles out with 60 power instead of my high quality 10 powered binocular, that's why we found it. Not
Yeah.
because I had a high end, super sharp image 10x50 binocular. It was simply because we had zoom and it allowed me to like really fine tune and pick out every little detail on that mountain face. So, with that said, with binoculars, a 10x50 UHD and a 10x50 Crossfire, it gives you the same magnification because they're both 10 power. One simply has higher quality optical imagery, but that doesn't always tell the whole story, right? Whereas, like, for example, 2 years ago in 2023, we went up for another high country hunt in Oregon. You brought the Vortex Diamondback 85 millimeter spotting scope.
Mhm.
I brought the Vortex Razor 65 millimeter spotting scope. So I had the higher end spotting scope, but it was the smaller. It had less zoom. It had a smaller objective, so it wasn't as good as at low light.
Yeah.
And what spotting scope did we end up using? Yours.
The Diamondback.
Because we were glassing deer so far away, I kept looking at it through my 65, and I'm like, I can't tell what this deer is. But then when we looked through yours, it wasn't the sharpest image, but because it had more zoom, we were able to depict more details.
So it had more zoom, and then another thing on that hunt specifically is a lot of the animal activity that we were seeing was right at first light and right at last light. And one thing that the Diamondback spotter that I brought had the advantage of was the 85 millimeter, meaning the size of the objective at the end, versus your 65 millimeter, which is smaller. That 85 millimeter allowed that spotting scope to gather more light from the atmosphere, and that's why we ended up using it mostly on that hunt, because the deer that we were seeing were right in those like very low light situations where you were losing the deer or maybe only able to see a body. In your 65 millimeter spotting scope, you could still see a nice clear picture of the deer in the 85.
And when it comes to the world of optics, it's a deep rabbit hole. You can get an 85 Razor HD and have it be the same exact thing as your Diamondback, just at a higher optical quality, higher performance everywhere you look about it, right? But the reason why I'm bringing these examples up is because optics can be very expensive. If we were to do a high country hunt, would I bring the mini Razor or the 85 Diamondback? I'd bring the 85 Diamondback, right? You don't need to go drop thousands of dollars on this. But again, cough up as much money as you can into your optics, because really the only reason why I have killed anything in the past 6 years is because I glassed them up.
Yeah.
I found them whether through the binocular or through the spotting scope.
Yeah.
That's why I found the animal, and that's why I went after and I shot him. The optics world is very interesting, but in that case, we bring this example up because we've got it done with $100 optics. We've got it done with $2,000 optics. Get the best you can because it can only help, right? But at the same time, don't just not go hunting because you couldn't afford a $2,000 top line binocular.
Absolutely. Now we've nailed down boots, packs, and optics. Those are there's other things that you can argue about or deem necessities, like clothes, like sleeping bags, like shelter, and these things are necessities. But let's jump into a few things that this is maybe arguably more fun to talk about. Some of those, not necessarily luxuries, but the personal items that we like to take that make our hunting in the backcountry experience better, or something we enjoy to take.
A puffy jacket. You don't need a puffy jacket to survive. You can just wear a lot of layers like this. It's fine. The puffy jacket is often expensive, but it's very lightweight. A lot of times when you're backcountry hunting, you're trying to cut weight. A puffy jacket, again, you're often looking about $200, $300, $400. Is it a necessity? I don't think so. Is it a luxury? Absolutely.
And, well, if we're on the clothing, I'll even one up you off the puffy jacket, and I will say puffy pants.
Yes.
Again, not a necessity, but something that has probably added to our success of our hunts, because we've been able to sit there on some pretty cold hunts comfortably and glass, which glassing is what ultimately led to the success.
Yes.
But being able to actually sit there and glass, and we both got our first pair of puffy pants, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, and like I said, not a necessity, but something that absolutely made our experience better.
Yes. When it comes to clothing, dress warm, bring the clothes you need to survive. But the puffy jacket and the puffy pant, it's a luxury for me. It's not a necessity. It's a luxury. I can survive. I've survived it without it for many, many years until like 2022 when we first picked up a pair of puffy pants. What's yours?
I would have to say,
Other than clothes.
Other than clothes, I've got two that are not necessities, but are, I think, fantastic things to have. One is a pair of trekking poles, and two is a water bladder. Not like a Camelback water bottle, like a bladder for your backpack, but one to keep at camp.
Yes. So not the water bladder where you are actively drinking from your pack.
Correct.
You're talking like a base camp,
like a reservoir.
Here's some fresh water if you need it at camp type.
Yeah. So starting with trekking poles.
What trekking poles are you using?
I am using the Argali Carbon X guide trekking poles.
Same here.
And they have been fantastic. Like a lot of pieces of gear, we've tried maybe 4 or 5 different trekking poles, and they have all worked. You can use ski poles. You can go to Goodwill and get $15 pair of ski poles, and the advantage that you get from those in the backcountry is going to be it's going to be a good portion of what you're going to get out of a very expensive or relatively expensive pair of trekking poles, like a Peaks or like an Argali. Yep. Or like these collapsible carbon ones.
Some of the benefits of trekking poles is you use them. The primary function of a trekking pole is you use them when you're hiking. So when you hike with trekking poles, you are oftentimes relieving some pressure from your knees, your legs, your joints. And when you're hiking many miles into the backcountry, that goes a long way. You don't wake up with achy legs or achy knee joints or anything of that sort. Another benefit to trekking poles is you can also use a trekking pole to pitch out your shelter instead of having to carry a separate center pole, which allows you to save a little bit of weight, right? We've used trekking poles even to filter out water because there wasn't enough water flowing into our little bladder, so we had to use the inner tubes of the trekking pole to make a little flow, and then goes into our water filter, right?
Yeah. An area in the hunting where trekking poles are extremely helpful is downhill. It makes a huge difference. And then also hiking out with an animal on your back with a heavier pack, which also a lot of times has a lot of downhill. But going downhill with trekking poles, it allows you to relieve a lot of pressure, like you were saying, off your knees. I have a torn meniscus in my knee, and my knees just get beat up when I'm going downhill for a long time. Trekking poles allow me to relieve that impact. And then also with heavy packs, the heavier pack, the more unstable you become. And if you're going over uneven country, if you're going through shale or rock fields or down really steep areas or muddy, trekking poles give you an area of stability to help go safer, to prevent rolling your ankles a little bit better, to help keep your balance and all those things.
That's the advantage of a trekking pole.
That's the advantage of trekking pole.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not a necessity, but something that really helps.
What about your water bladder?
Water bladder.
You were talking about your little water bladder system. So what is it?
So my water bladder, we've used a couple. We've used the MSR Drome Light, and I currently use and have used now for a couple years the Sea to Summit water bladder. This one I have a 4 liter or a 6 liter, so it's enough water that when we hit a water source, when we camel up, you could
Yes.
say, we can fill that and hike it up to our camp, and then it's enough to give us water for maybe a day and a half. Do meals, make our, sleepy cider or whatever we're going to do at night, and not feel like we're having to spare every little bit of water. The thing that I like about the Sea to Summit water bladder that I have is it's a pretty affordable piece of gear. It's something that is kind of fun because you're not dropping, $400, $500, $700 like a pack or piece, boots or something like that. You're spending maybe $30 or $40. And the Sea to Summit one specifically is made out of like a fabric. It's waterproof, obviously, and it must be some sort of plastic line on the inside. But the outside's like this very durable fabric.
It's almost fabric. It feels almost like Cordura.
To where I've dropped it with water on rocks, on the ground, and it is indestructible. Whereas a lot of other water bladders follow kind of like the kind of line of the ones that you put in your pack, almost like a see-through, like the MSR Drome Light. Great water bladder, super lightweight, but it's not as durable because it's just that kind of like polyurethane, rubber, plastic. And we've gotten a hole in it in the backcountry. And
I got rid of mine.
Yeah.
Because the other thing on top to touch it is with your Sea to Summit, the valve where you pour water out, it's actually at the bottom. So when gravity pushes water, you can get every single ounce of water.
Yeah.
With the Drome Light, the valve is off to the side. And so like even when you open it, there will be a pool that's sitting at the bottom of the bag because the water is not high enough to actually seep out of the valve.
Yeah.
Which is why it got super annoying to use.
Yeah, a water bladder for me is one thing that it's nice to have. It's a little bit of a luxury, but at the same time, I feel like it's worth the wait and the cost of buying it and the work to bring it into the backcountry that it's going to add to the experience of the hunt.
In terms of like the wants, the truth is I don't carry a lot of wants. I usually just carry necessities at this point. I'll just do a quick run through. Like necessities are like headlamps, flashlights. Never forget those. The both of us, we use Phoenix. That's the lighting brand. And we use the HM60R. That's the specific model. It's a headlamp. Super bright. It's rechargeable. And we often carry a portable power bank. So if that ever dies or battery runs out, just plug it in, recharge it overnight. You're good to go.
And that's actually one of the only things that you take two of on a backcountry hunt.
I don't carry a lot of backups. But when it comes to headlamps, I always carry a spare. And I carry two of the same exact ones. So I carry two HMR or HM60Rs from Phoenix. On top of that, I mean, we've touched on it, right? Like having the right clothing system. That's what I want. Next up, game bags, a kill kit, right? Have a good knife so that when you kill an animal, you can properly break it down. You can probably store the meat. A good knife, I mean, we've used a lot. I mean, we've used Montana Knife Company. We've used Argali, Havalon, Outdoor Edge, you name it, Benchmade. We used them all, and really at the end of it, you just need a knife that is comfortable, relatively lightweight, and it holds its edge. If not, then carry a little extra pocket sharpener, and then game bags. If you don't know what game bags are, they're essentially like a pillow cloth with paracord on the top where you put your meat inside and you can cinch it so that the meat sits inside so egg or flies cannot lay eggs on it, but while at the same time it's breathable so it can dissipate heat as well as blood.
And pillowcases actually work great for game bags.
Our boys down in Oregon, they use pillowcases and they just toss them out and buy new ones every time they kill because they're really inexpensive.
Yeah, so it's another thing. You can go spend $100 on a set of game bags, or if you have the money, which is great, and they do work better and they work great, and they've got the paracord to hang them. But if you're like, man, I'm kind of strapped and I forgot that I didn't get game bags for my hunt, grab some pillowcases. They work great. They're breathable. They keep the bugs off. They let the blood drain.
Just some more necessities I'm going to throw on. A satellite phone. We use Zoleo many times where Nate and I are hunting. We do not have cell service. So we use a satellite phone to communicate to our loved ones back at home. And we use the Zoleo. There's other ones like the Garmin InReach. I've used both. I prefer the Zoleo. Advantages of the Garmin InReach is that you can use you can do everything on the Garmin InReach device itself, whereas the Zoleo, it's dependent on your phone. You have to Bluetooth them. And so when you're having to use your phone and your Zoleo, that's another avenue for something to go wrong because your phone might be dead, the Zoleo might be dead, and on top of that, Bluetooth connection. Just a little bit more things you have to think about, but I haven't really had issues with mine,
No.
and which is why I prefer it because it's a lot easier to connect with my loved ones. The interface of the Zoleo app, it's way better than the Garmin.
Yeah. Another absolute necessity in hunting is what the industry likes to call the sleep system. And that's
Yes.
just simply whatever shelter you're using, whatever sleeping bag you're using, and whatever sleeping pad you're using.
Yep.
And that's whether you're backcountry hunting and that's whether you're camping or backpacking. So the number of different tents, of shelters, of sleeping bags, and of pads out there is it's a rabbit hole. I mean, there are hundreds of great options for every single one. But whatever option you do pick, there are three things that you have to have. We currently, for the last year, coming up on 2 years now, we've been using Argali shelters. As of recently, Argali released their Alpine sleeping bags, their 20 degree and their 0 degree, which we have been using and loving. And then we both use
The Thermarest.
the Thermarest, the X-Therm Pros for our sleeping pads. But like I said, there's tons of options. We've used, Feathered Friends sleeping bags. We've used Western Mountaineering sleeping bags, Stone Glacier sleeping bags. It's a necessity. A lot of times you pay more for a lighter sleeping bag, so it's something you can get fairly reasonable. You just might have to carry a little bit more weight.
Yep. We're kind of like bouncing all over the place, but like this podcast is not about dialing in your gear. We're really just generalizing what you need, what you don't need, and just kind of touching the surface level stuff. Another thing that I'm going to add on to this necessity list is a water filter. You need to have a water filter unless you're packing all your water in, which most people are not because water is really heavy. So a water filter, I use the Sawyer water filter. It's the Sawyer Squeeze. I believe you use the same one as well.
Yep.
On top of that, I also carry the iodine tablets just in case the water filter malfunctions, or sometimes when I'm filtering extremely dirty water, I will filter it through the Sawyer Squeeze, and then I will also use the iodine tablets. Back in 2023, my only water source on my solo backcountry elk hunt was a wallow. So I filtered the water out through my Sawyer Squeeze, and then I put the iodine tablets in there just to be extra safe. And then at night, I took that same filtered water and then I boiled it in my jet boil. So it's like 3 different methods that you can go about curing water. But water filters they're not necessarily a necessity if you have a jet boil, but they just make your life out there way easier. You're not burning extra fuel in your jet boil canister, and iodine tablets are extremely expensive. So using a water filter, it saves you a lot of money and it's faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping over to what you can do to help yourself with backcountry hunting outside of the actual hunt in the gear. I just want to talk about scouting, or in this case, e-scouting, using Onyx as a mapping software, because one thing that, if you grow up doing the hunting from the truck or your deer camps with your family or whatever that is, a lot of times those are generally, easier places to access, places you can drive up to, maybe places you can spend time scouting in throughout the whole year, or at least during most of the year. Whereas that's not the case with a lot of these backcountry hunting spots. They're snowed in for 6 or 8 months out of the year. They might be a bigger commitment to get to, a big day hike, multiple days of hiking or multiple hours of driving. And so how can you use other resources to help prepare yourself for these backcountry hunts?
The most obvious that I'm going to touch on is if you're doing any type of summer scouting or like front country type stuff, is you're exercising. Anytime you can exercise, kind of get your legs in the rhythm of packing a little bit heavier, spending time out there, that goes a long ways because people might not realize it, but like even when you're just around camp, you're actually moving a lot more than on average at home. Most people, when they're at home, you're sitting on a couch. You're not doing anything. When you're out there camping, even just like walking 20 yards to go pick up some wood to do campfire, like you're always moving around, that goes a long ways. So the most obvious one is you're exercising. You're getting physical conditioning in if you're doing summer scouting or these things before you actually embark on your hunt.
And it's, again, another rabbit hole and a topic that we could spend hours on is e-scouting. But use that to your advantage. It's an easy thing that you can do from your couch at home or maybe from your desk at work. But it's something that you can use to kind of dip your toe into the area in the country that you are planning on backcountry hunting, and you can do things ahead of time, like try to find water sources on maps. Maps nowadays are unbelievable at marking springs or creeks, seasonal creeks, year-round creeks, all these things. Find flat spots to pitch tent, find routes to go from basin to basin. So all these little things are things that you can do out there, but it might be able to make your hunt a little bit more streamlined, be able to spend more time glassing, looking for animals rather than for camp or for water, if you can help figure out some of these things online before you go.
Before we move on, another thing I want to touch on is when you use Onyx as e-scouting and then you go into a practice backcountry trip, whether you're scouting or not, sometimes what you think is online through e-scouting, it's not actually it in reality, right? What you might think is good on Onyx or e-scouting, you might end up there and be like, this is not what I thought at all. Like this place is a total bust, or like this is way better than I thought, right? Yeah. And so like what you e-scout may not always be exactly what's going to happen in reality.
I would almost exclusively say that errs on the side of the country in real life is way bigger than the country looks online.
Yes. Oftentimes, too, it's a lot thicker in real life than Onyx portrays.
Steeper, deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because as good as technology is today, it's still not as good as you just being out there in person.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of a rapid fire getting into backcountry hunting, some essential gear, some things to help make it a little easier, a couple tactics that you can do outside of the actual backcountry hunt in preseason. We are going to move on to our second game of the podcast, which is what we'll close with, and this one is Fast Facts. And this is not a quiz. This is just an interesting fact that we found that we want to share with each other and share with you guys.
Yeah, so since I went first with the other game, how about we start with you for Fast Facts?
Okay. My fast fact has to do with white-tailed deer.
Okay.
So although only 10 to 40% of white-tailed deer breed in their first year of life, these deer have evolved to breed early and often, with many white-tailed does being able to breed yearly until the age of 10.
Really?
Yes.
I've always grown up learning that does breed every other year.
Yeah. So 2 things about that surprised me. The yearly breeding surprised me, and it also, I don't know if it's at 6 months old or a year and a half old, but breeding at a year is really quick for a doe.
I know that most does breed after their year and a half, because that's when they breed, right? In November, in the rut, in the fall. And I've heard of some people saying that some fawns that are born really early, like first born in May or whatever, they sometimes can breed that same winter that they are born in the spring. So like a fawn that's born in May 2025 may end up being bred in November of 2025, which that's pretty fast.
Yeah,
that's really young.
That's really fast.
That's also another point. Like, so like down in the South, or I guess in general, wherever whitetail exists, these yearly fawns, I'm going to call them fawns, they are often the reason why there's a second rut. So a lot of the mature does, they'll go into heat during the first rut, but then because these fawns are not quite there yet, give them another month or two, then they're ready. That's why there's a second rut. So
interesting.
There you go.
You gave me some fast fact there with my own fast fact.
I was just building off of you. Awesome. In the spirit of backcountry, I guess it's kind of 2, but it's really just 1. Isolophilia is the love of being alone or isolated. Isolophilia. Isolophobia is the fear of being alone or isolated.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
Those words actually make a lot of sense.
yes.
It's basically isolation phobia or isolation love.
Yes.
Very cool.
Two of the only scientific words that actually make sense.
So we're hopefully talking to a lot of people that want to be isolophilic.
Yes. Or you might be listening to this because you have a phobia of being alone and you're trying to get over that hurdle. We
Yeah.
promise you it's not that bad. You just got to get out there. And I guess before we go, that is something that we kind of missed. Some people don't want to do it because they're scared of stuff out there. Totally understand it. But the more you expose yourself, the more you put yourself out there, the more you become comfortable with it, and the more that fear starts to fade away.
Yeah, it's basically exposure therapy.
Exactly.
It's the same way that people that have fear of flying in planes, have to get over that by working up to actually flying in planes. It's the same thing. Hunting in the backcountry, whether you're solo, it's definitely can be a bit more of a challenge if you're solo, or whether with you're a buddy or two. Just getting out there, doing it more often is going to get easier with time.
There you have it, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on episode number 2. This was really just a surface level podcast of getting our feet wet with backcountry hunting. In the future, we'll dive more into the specific topics that we kind of speed ran throughout this podcast. But hopefully that's enough information for you guys to shift where you want to go for 2025 or in the future years when you're planning to do your first backcountry hunt.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you watching or listening, depending on where you're tuning in. We will see you next week for episode 3.
Thanks, guys.